When I was growing up, my parents went almost every weekend to the Ozark Mountains, which was just a couple of hours away from where we lived. Most of the time I went with them, but there were times that I stayed back home as well. When this happened, obviously, I had to have a babysitter. We all know what a babysitter's role is. They were to keep me safe and set these boundary lines and rules, keep me corralled inside of those boundary lines, and ultimately just protect me until my parents were able to be home. I usually hated having to have a babysitter, but I'm also not going to lie. As a preteen, it would have been pretty scary at night by myself. So inwardly, I was happy that they were there, even though outwardly I may not have always shown that. Now, when I was around 15, my parents decided I was old enough to stay all weekend home alone, so didn't quite need a babysitter at that point. I was driving, and they figured I had come to know the rules well enough, and they figured that I knew what would fly and what wouldn't fly with them. But right before they left, my dad pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, we trust you, but if you have any issues at all, any questions, any concerns, I'm going to have my phone on me the entire weekend. You just give me a call if anything at all comes up." And you know what? For the most part, everything went just fine. Sure, I made a few mistakes here and there, and I may have even taken a few liberties now and then, but overall, I loved my parents, I respected them, and I wanted to also make sure that I stayed in their good graces because I didn't want a babysitter in the future. In today's passage from Galatians, Paul tells us that the whole purpose of the law was to be just like that babysitter for us. In case you're wondering what Paul means by the law, he's referring to the Judaic law, which was the first 5 books of the Bible, also known as the Torah, the traditions of Judaism at the time, and the rules that were passed down rabbi to rabbi over the generations. The Hebrew word that we translate into Jewish law is halacha, which also means the path that one takes. And I think that's such a great way to describe it. The way a person lives their life, their speech, their actions, their thoughts, all of these make up the path that someone is on in their life. And the law is the path that was handed down directly from God. But a path eventually leads somewhere, right? And that's what Paul is telling us here too. He says the law is a path that leads to faith in Christ. And he says once a person reaches faith in Christ, there's no longer a need to have the law as a teacher. You don't need a babysitter anymore. You see, the law is not a bad thing, even though sometimes we talk about it so negatively, kind of like we do with a babysitter, I guess. The law has a purpose. And as with a babysitter, it helps keep us safe from going too far off track, and it sets these boundary lines for our own protection. But we can't confuse the babysitter with the parent either. Once the babysitter was off the clock, I was back in the care of my parents. That was their responsibility. But really, I never stopped being their responsibility. Even when the babysitter was on the clock, I never stopped being a child of my parents. Ultimately, I belonged to them, and ultimately, I answered to them. The law is here to give us guidance and to hold our hands until we're able to reach faith ourselves. And once we reach faith ourselves, the law has served its purpose and we're free from it. But that doesn't mean we have to go it alone either. Just like my dad said I could pick up the phone and call him if I have any questions or concerns at all, we have that same access to God through prayer, meditation, and the Spirit. We can still go to the Father directly, and we can even still go to the law for reference if we're unsure about something or if we need guidance on a decision, but we aren't tied down to it anymore. See, the law, again, is not a bad thing. It's just not the end all. The law was this gift to humanity at a time when we really didn't know how to get along, and we really didn't know how to live amongst one another. And ultimately, the law was trying to teach us how to love God, love others, and love ourselves. And until we're able to love like that, then we need the law's help. But when we're able to love like that, able to love like Christ, then we can step off of this path over to the one that Jesus took. And that path is a little narrower, but the journey is much, much better. Have an awesome day.